Welcome to the Hello Seattle podcast, a local perspective on living in and moving to Seattle.
Yeah, we're excited to introduce you to people, places, and communities that make living in our hometown special. Hello, Seattle. I am your host, Dan Keller.
And I'm your host, Zach McDonald, and we're excited to be back with you here today. It's been a few weeks since we recorded our last episode. I mean, I guess I had a kid. We had our fifth kid.
I was going to say, it's been a while. You had a baby, you've broken an arm or a hand.
Punched a wall. Note to everybody, do your own demo work with tools and not your fists. I wasn't mad.
I've never seen you mad.
The lamest. I do get irritated. It's not, I do get mad, but that wasn't a moment of madness. I guess it was madness, right? Because I wasn't thinking.
You lost your mind.
Straight. Yeah, it was more like teenage boy exuberance than it was like anger, if that makes sense. But it's kind of the same thing.
You found the stud.
Yeah, I found this. I'm a stud finder, but that's the weird. Anyways, we won't go too far into that. But today we wanted to talk about the NAR settlement and some of the commission changes, buyer broker commissions. We talked about this earlier in the year when we talked about the buyer brokerage agreements in Washington State, and really Washington has been way ahead of the curve with a lot of the different rule changes, and most of the settlement, Washington's already implemented those changes. So I think there'll be less adjustment and shift here. But Dan, what's your hot take with all the news lately? I think I've had a lot of clients, buyers, sellers asking me questions. Almost everybody I talk to is asking me my opinion on this. So this is going to be our chance to do that.
I think that's fascinating because as a mortgage professional, it hit our industry as breaking news. And whenever you have a $500 million settlement in the real estate or mortgage space, which this one was in the real estate space, it rocks our world. So
it's like 418 million, right?
Yeah, but I mean that's what's been documented, I think, just to NAR. There's been a lot of like even some private smaller lawsuits. So if you're rounding up, I bet when it's all said and done, it'll be north of a $500 million. But what I did immediately was I started calling top performing real estate agents like you and going, hey, this is huge. This made the news. What's your take? And the really great thing in talking with you and a lot of other real estate agents that sell a lot of homes, they're like, this is making national news, but Washington State actually implemented these exact disclosures and agreements over a year ago. So we've been complying with these new guidelines, but what's making the news and what's really happening is completely different. So the lawsuits made the news. It's muddying the waters. And what was fascinating to me is when I talked to you, I'm like, are you seeing this? And you're like, Dan, my last 3 listing appointments, the sellers asked. So I think we should start off with that and then how we're kind of educating and talking through this. And then I'll come full circle on what the lending industries have already changed. We're talking Fannie and Freddie and Ginnie Mae are already starting to change their max allowable concession guidelines to accommodate the lawsuits. And that's I'll come full circle on this. It'll be kind of funny when you hear me say it. But when you're talking with sellers right now, what are they saying to you?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion because you can read things like, 6% commissions are gone and, buyers have to pay their own agents and sellers don't have to pay a commission anymore. You just read the headlines. And so that's what most people do. Yeah. I mean, how many people actually read the article? Yeah. Right. I think we're in an era where people see headlines and then they don't spend their time reading it necessarily. No, it's not everybody, but I would say a large portion of people might be scrolling through a feed and see different headlines. And if it's not super interesting, they might not read it, but they might still catalog that in their mind, right? So I think the first thing I talk about with sellers and buyers is just kind of the general idea of what the heck the settlement is, right? So, NAR has a few points here. I think this is interesting to kind of break it down. So there's, a liability release. Whenever you have a settlement, you're not necessarily confessing to doing something, but you're saying, hey, it's better. Let's just take the money and not deal with this, which is kind of what happened, right? So there's like a release of liability.
Which let's pause. Yeah. That protects us. The little guys like you.
Yeah, real estate. Real estate agents, not, so the idea here is that the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, is taking the hit, so to speak, but protecting
The individual agents.
The individual members and firms that are members from liability under these types of lawsuits. They still deny any wrongdoing. So the argument is that they never really kept fighting this. It was just easier and better for everybody, in their opinion, to just go ahead and settle this versus continue to fight it. But one of the big things is that compensation is going to be removed off of the MLS for buyers brokers. So that's a big piece. Another piece is that written agreements for MLS participating acting for buyers. So what you need to do is have a buyer brokerage agreement, which we talked about earlier in the year, something that the Northwest Multiple Listing Service is already doing and requiring. There is a settlement payment for people that potentially were wronged or overcharged, which is the argument. I think it's a $418 million settlement here. What I was reading is you've got about 21 million people that are potentially impacted by this. So maybe you got somewhere between, $10 and $20 a person. It's not a very, large amount of money. I think the attorneys are the ones making a lot of money on this, to be really honest.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right.
I don't know if anybody's really benefiting financially from this, at least in the short term. But the biggest thing that is different for Washington is the offer of compensation. So historically, there's been a field on the multiple listing service where I would see this, and it's been publicized for years in Washington. You can see what that fee is, what's being offered. And so this year we already changed to requiring an agreement between buyers and agents, which makes a lot of sense. We talked about that in a different episode. We also, in Washington, I can't remember if this was 3, 4, 5 years ago, but it was a few years ago, where the requirement for offering compensation was removed. So there's a field for it in the Northwest Multiple Listing Service, but you don't have to offer any compensation. And on the listing agreements, it's already broken out. This is what the listing firm compensation is. If you want to offer a buyer broker compensation, this is what it is. And it's very clear. The idea was transparency. And I think the Northwest Multiple Listing Service has done a really good job. So that's the Northwest Washington. A lot of Washington's real estate agents are members of that. And
which they also started a few years ago too.
That's what I'm saying.
Putting your guys' commissions
so that was
the
first
settlement statement. So it's there. I get what the industry is trying to do. They're trying to transparency, and I believe in that.
I think if you talk to most people, they want that. Even professionals, it's a good thing for the industry. And so what's interesting here, though, is the big change to me that's going to affect Washington. So the first answer to the question is, well, do you have to pay a buyer broker? No, and you haven't had to for years, but it's been continuing in Washington, right? The biggest change that's going to happen is that you can't put that compensation offer on the MLS anymore. So is it still going to happen? That's the first question. Are sellers still going to pay buyer broker commissions, right? That's the first question. And or should they? And that's an interesting topic. I think there's a way to facilitate that. So buyers, I think there'll be a new field added. We're still waiting for this. Mid-July is when all this is going to kind of take effect. So until then, everything's going to function as it has, which in Washington means everything here is already in play. It's been in play for years. But the first thing that's going to happen is they'll add a field for closing costs. So buyers will be able to receive a certain amount of closing costs, and the sellers can say, hey, I will give you 3%, 4% towards your closing costs, which could be loan costs. It could be prepaids. These are all things that are happening already. There's no field for it. But the interesting thing that I want to talk and hear from you about, and I think this affects loans, is that could also be used to pay commissions for an agent. So if a buyer and a buyer's agent are in an agreement that they're going to get a 2% or 2.5%, 3%, whatever the agreement is, it's all been negotiable for a long time, right? And always has been negotiable. Whatever that agreement is, the buyer is going to be on the hook for that if the seller is not paying it. So how can that work on the financing side? Because I know there are some limits to how much a lender allows for a credit.
There are limits per different loan programs. So let's just talk about conforming, just your standard conventional loan. If you're putting down less than 10%, the max allowable seller credit is 3%. Okay. But if you're putting down 10% or more, it's more. Okay. You can go up to 6%. So,
so it just depends on the dollar amount.
Here's the thing. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which back all conventional mortgages, came out last week, and they've already edited their guidelines saying that real estate agents' commissions being credited or rolled into the loan and then getting credited, or rolled into the purchase price and being credited back. So let's say your commission is 3%, and the seller is going to raise the purchase price and then give an additional credit for 3%, but the seller is already giving a 2% credit for closing costs, the borrower's loan fees and closing costs.
Yep.
And they're only putting down 5%. In a normal market, that wouldn't fly. Yep. Now they've changed their guidelines. It's completely okay. Now, this is where I'm just sitting here over here, because I'm actually a logical thinker, and I try to look at this very not just one-sided, okay, I get all of this. I get the idea was transparency, but I also get that lawyers, dirty attorneys, in my opinion, went out, chased a bunch of ambulances, and filed lawsuits to the tune of $500 million. Do you know what attorneys' commissions are? I read an article the other day that there are battles right now. These attorneys are going after their commissions on the NAR settlement to the tune of 41%.
That's
a $250 million. Okay, so
I'm seeing things in the 60, 80. There's all sorts of. Again, I'm sure some of it's not accurate,
but Zach, isn't that money from the lawsuit supposed to go to homeowners that were ill-advised and financially maybe told something or not disclosed something that they were, supposed to? So it was to protect homeowners and maybe go and give some compensation back to homeowners. The numbers, the math that I'm running is less than a couple $100 to each of these homeowners, which is nothing. Who's getting rich on this? The attorneys. What I think is happening too,
the massive commission percentage.
They're getting the big commissions out of this. Wow. So this doesn't make any sense, but I think maybe it takes that for the mortgage industry and the real estate industry to go, okay, hey, we need more. I'm 100% for transparency.
Yeah, we've talked about that here many times.
And I spend extra time with my clients explaining a lot of things that are behind the scenes. So what this is done now by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, okay, guys, think about this. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, government-backed entities, now changing their guidelines to accommodate commissions being paid to you, a full commission being paid to you.
Again, no full isn't a thing, right?
Not
whatever we agreed to.
Let's just say standard, whatever you agreed to.
Well, let's say a full commission is what the buyer and the buyer's agent agreed to, right? That's what the buyer's going to pay the buyer's agent.
Yep.
So
which pre-lawsuit was, let's just say 3% was pretty standard. 2.5 to 3% for your commission as a buyer's agent was pretty standard.
Yep.
So your commission, but Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac make adjustments now for you to get paid your commission. Okay. What has changed?
Nothing. Not for buyers and not for sellers either, right?
A lot of real estate companies got sued. NAR got sued. A lot of people got sued, but nothing has changed.
Not yet, right? Maybe it changes, but what we're already talking about is how do we continue to facilitate the payment of buyer's agents from sellers without advertising it that way, right?
I guess that's it.
Maybe it's. I think the idea is it's going to be harder to do that, so maybe it's not going to happen. But I don't. We've already seen the government starting to make some considerations. So
I just think it would have been a lot easier for the government just to step in and say, "Hey, we don't need these silly lawsuits. Let's just step in and go, hey."
Buyer's agency agreements. Those are needed, right?
This is needed.
Yeah.
And this is what
it's
but
required.
Here's the thing. In 1996, the government did step in. 1998, and required buyer's agency representation. So now it's like, okay, they came in
because it was bad for buyers not to have representation.
Yeah. Now they're discounting the value of representation. And I get there's outliers, you guys. I get there's times where a real estate agent didn't deserve a $50,000 commission. I totally understand both sides of the argument here. And I'm trying to stay somewhat neutral and just kind of like logical here. I think the government could have just stepped in like they already have, but just said, hey, we want more transparency, like they did in the mortgage industry back in 2012. We want more transparency with the Dodd-Frank Act and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Guys, you're going to have to start doing this. You're not going to advertise this or that. But now let me put on my homeowner hat, because I am a homeowner. And let's say that the market kind of levels off and isn't a hot seller's market like it has been, right? You know what I'm going to put in my front yard?
A sign?
I'm going to put offering a 3% or a 3.5% commission to attract more agents to want to show my house so I can sell my house. So it's, guys, you have to understand both sides as a buyer and as a seller. Sellers, you want people looking at your houses. Your job as real estate agents, you show houses, right? So I want to incentivize my house being shown.
Yeah, exactly. So if buyers, so there's a couple different things here. It's like, okay, so should sellers offer compensation or closing costs that could be used that way, right?
Yeah.
If buyers are they're agreeing with their agent on a certain price, if the amount that they've agreed to isn't being offered by the seller, that means that they're on the hook for that additional amount. So if they go see your house, they know that they're going to be paying money to see your house. So which is more likely, that they go to see your house or they don't go to see your house? Are they going to go see the house that's offering the amount of closing costs to cover the expense? I mean, if I was a buyer and I didn't have as much financial means, I would be looking for opportunities to buy a house without spending my own money. So I think it does reduce the amount of interest on a specific house potentially. But then it begs the question. So I think the whole point of the lawsuit is, part of it is that sellers don't want to pay, or these particular sellers didn't want to pay for a buyer's representation. So the question is, who's paying for that, right? Should the buyer pay for it instead of the seller? And then it comes down to, can the buyer pay for that, right? So some buyers are going to be able to pay their agent whatever they want. They can have whatever representation they want. Others may only be able to have, they might not be able to have any representation. And then some maybe can afford some representation, but then you start to get into, well, okay, what's the quality of the representation that they get? Is it equal? Is it equitable? And then is the government going to, like they do for down payment assistance, are they going to start paying commissions to real estate agents? I mean, I could imagine a scenario where you have a down payment assistance program, and you have real estate agents working with those people, and they're getting, whatever it is, it's whatever the government agrees to, but then they're paying the real estate agent to represent the buyer, kind of like a public defender. I mean, that's an interesting scenario that I could see happening.
It could go in a bunch of different directions. I think at the end of the day, too, you listening to this need to understand, and I see this side of it as a mortgage professional working with home buyers. Imagine this scenario. You're relocating to Seattle from Texas, okay? And you've got the moving van, the truck, the semi-truck loaded up, and you're starting your job on Tuesday, and it's Thursday. And all of a sudden, your lender is calling saying, hey, we got some issues with X, Y, and Z. Most of the time, the real estate agent jumps in and helps solve for those problems, helps keep the train on the tracks. You go even back further than that. You've got home inspections, you've got appraisals, you've got negotiations, you've got so many things. I came out with an article the other day, and I identified over 90 things, not on every transaction, but 90 things that buyers agents do to help represent buyers. And I think that it's valuable. I think it's more than just opening a door. There's so many processes that take place that you, who's listening, who may work at Amazon, for example, and you're in tech, you don't sell and buy real estate for a living. And that's why you hire a real estate agent. That's why you have representation for them to introduce you to a great local lender where you can get good, rates and fees, and it has great processes and contractors and maybe painters and everything. It's more than just opening a door.
Well, and I think real estate agents need to show their value and be able to prove that. I think, historically, when I help someone sell a house, I meet with them. I talk with them about, the services I'm going to provide them. We talk about preparing their house for the market and all the contractors and the project management on the front end. We talk about all the marketing, and those are all out-of-pocket expenses. We talk about the negotiating and all that stuff, right? That all goes into it. I think buyers agents need to be doing the same thing. I've been meeting with buyers and doing consultations and all those things for years. But I think a lot of real estate agents like accidentally, it's like fishing. You know, you can hook a fish and you can snag a fish.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of real estate agents have snagged buyers throughout, just accidentally worked with them.
Yeah.
And that's not good for buyers either. And I think one outcome is that there are less real estate agents because it's going to be harder to work with a buyer because you have to show that you bring value to that transaction. And if you don't, people aren't going to want to work with you. So I think being able to prove your value and show that you're going to help them and commensurate to the compensation, I think that's a huge part. I think some buyers are going to be paying some of the commission in some cases to their agent. And maybe it's split between buyer and seller in different ways. And I think in other cases, sellers are going to be, still compensating buyer's agent. So again, in Washington, this has been the case for a few years. We haven't seen much change at all. None, really. Yeah. I've noticed zero change. There's always been discount, quote unquote, discount brokers is what they would even call themselves. And they market that they do it for less. And maybe they offer different services or less services. There's flat fee listings. That's always been there. There's people that charge more than 3% to market your house, right? So there's always been that competition in the market. I think it will look different. There'll be some innovation probably in the market. But in Washington, it's already been like this for the most part. I think the biggest change will just be how the commission or offer of compensation is marketed.
How it's explained. Yep.
I have an interesting story. Might be a good way to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So my wife and I were building a greenhouse building over the top of our swimming pool in the backyard. My wife runs a swim school. So we bought a house that has a swimming pool. And this project is way more expensive than I anticipated, to be really honest. Probably about 3x what in my mind I thought it would be. And mainly it's because of what's required. We thought we'd be able to put up a cheaper building or not even a real building to cover the pool. Turns out they wanted a real building, so now we're just going for it, right? So thankfully we have the means to do it. But something I just found out, the greenhouse itself is, and this will be helpful, I think, just as an illustration, the greenhouse itself is in the $180,000 range. So this is a glass, really nice greenhouse. And we went with glass because it's going to look a lot nicer in the yard and add a little more value. But the interesting part is I got the install bid. Dan, how much do you think my install bid was for a $180,000 greenhouse?
I don't know.
Guess.
100 grand.
It was $60,000. Okay. And I asked because, I've sold $2 million houses and got a commission in the $50,000 range, right? But I've never had a commission. Now, just haven't sold a bunch of super luxury houses. I've never got a commission that big. So I called him and I just said, hey, I'm curious. How do you bid out the job?
Yeah.
You know what he told me?
What?
He's got a price per square foot bid and he's got a total cost bid percentage and he averages the two together. You know what the percentage was?
What?
When I calculated? Over 30%.
Okay.
Sounds a lot like those attorney fees.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in real estate, we've been talking about, commissions in the, somewhere between 1.5% to 3%, depending on who the, company is for listings and offering buyers, 2.5%, 3%, whatever it ends up being, right? Those numbers are tiny in comparison to what the numbers are for other projects. And I'm going to be paying over 30% install.
Wow.
And now, granted, he's going to be working at my house for a few weeks, just like I'd be working on a listing for 3-4 weeks, right?
Or longer. Yeah.
Managing the project. He's got a few staff. Like I got a few, like I get it, but still it's a big number. And I was a little surprised. I wasn't shocked, but I was thinking maybe in the $25,000 to $30,000 range. No, less than $200,000 project.
$60K.
Yeah. And contractors charge that. It's pretty typical to see 20 to 30% markup for a general contractor. I had one we talked to was going to be $3,000 a month plus a 25% markup on everything.
Okay.
That would have been $100,000+ to the contractor, right? And that's on top of the cost of actually doing the construction. Yeah. So,
they're fighting over 3.
Yeah. So that's, I guess, some food for thought. I think that it's important to have competition. I don't think every real estate agent should be paid the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's the argument. Part of the argument is that real estate agents have all been getting paid the same. There's not enough competition.
Yep.
I think that's arguable anyway, but here we are. So are buyers going to be paying some commissions? I think that will be the case in some cases. I think sellers will still offer compensation or at least closing costs that buyers could use towards compensation. Dan, what do you think about lenders not just rolling in the cost? Because we've rolled in the cost of closing costs into a purchase. Like, hey, we're going to spend this much money. We're going to add on top of that to be able to get closing costs covered. So like I did that on my own purchases. Like, hey, I'll pay extra as long as the appraisal works. Cool. I'm going to finance $8,000, $6,000, whatever it ends up being, and I'm going to save out-of-pocket expenses. Are we going to be able to finance real estate commissions too? Not just get closing costs paid, but are we going to be able to roll them into the loan or finance them? Yeah. Kind of like a rehab loan.
Yeah. That's the whole suggestion with the Fannie and Freddie news release this week, is that we call it stacking, that you'll be able to, if needed, to stack that and it wouldn't impact the mortgage guidelines. Now, the one thing you mentioned, which is key, if you are going to stack it, meaning raising the purchase price to then ask the seller a seller credit, the home has to appraise. So I think that you may see some flexibility there with VA because it's zero down, maybe see some flexibility with FHA there. But right now, the idea is that you can stack that.
I mean, those are low down payment options, right? Yeah. So FHA, VA, I mean, VA zero down.
Yep.
I've had veterans buying houses with literally getting money back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If there's closing costs covered and things like that, or they're paying like, $1,000 out of their pocket. I mean, adding in commissions would be, I mean, I wonder if maybe that's covered too. Maybe there's a percentage that the VA pays. But again, this is just, now the government's just funding this. The big question though, and Biden made a comment about how real estate needs to be cheaper if commissions are less. I mean, I want your honest thoughts. Who is going to lower the price of their house because they're paying less in commissions?
No one. I mean, that was just a ridiculous comment, and that's just a lack of knowledge. Sadly, politicians, and it's not just
And it's not.
Biden.
This isn't any hate on Biden. It's just the idea.
They're so disconnected to the average American and what's going on. So no, you reducing your commissions is not going to. And by the way, real estate agents reduce their commissions all the time. I see it all the time. I see a credit thrown around here, a credit thrown around there.
Yeah, but if you don't have any commissions, if you're not getting paid as much, or you don't have as much flexibility, you're not going to be able to do that for your clients, right?
Correct. That's it.
Like I've been able to save deals by, you're like, hey, I can, credit a couple $1,000s to help make a deal happen or something like that.
Yeah. So I think that, the reason why we did this podcast today is a follow-up from we did one right away when the news came out and it was breaking. Now that the dust is settled, really nothing has changed other than a little bit more transparency, which is great. And you can't market
commissions, but you can market closing costs.
You can. Yeah. So I don't think anything's going to change. I think the great agents like you are going to be able to explain this and articulate what this means up front. That's going to be the separating factor. And then it's business as usual. We're in a very competitive housing market. It's not going anywhere. You need representation. Okay, let's all move on. I just wish the media was better at just portraying the facts and explaining the facts versus just trying to get views. And I have numerous articles that are just so wrong, so way off course that only cloud people's judgments. And when you're talking about a home, it's the largest financial decision or transaction of one's lifetime. You don't need the media out there that doesn't know what they're talking about. Same thing with the president saying things that just aren't correct, getting in the way of you in a large financial decision. So that's why we're here. Okay, last question. Do you think that real estate prices will go up as a result of this? No, I don't think anything's going to change. Okay. Okay, so we were just talking about stacking commissions, though, on top of the home price. So that's if every seller said, no, I will not offer a commission. No, but think about this. So we just said that you wouldn't drop the price of your house, right, if you were paying less in commissions, because when I'm a real estate agent doing a market analysis for a seller, or an appraiser's doing an appraisal, you know what they're not looking at in that analysis?
the commission percentages. An appraiser and a real estate agent, when they're doing their analysis, they're they're different but similar. Nobody's considering the commission percentage, and it's purely what did this house sell for. Okay. Commissions are not part of that. So take the commissions out. Now you're listing your house for the price that the neighbor sold for. You're saying, I'm not going to offer any compensation. And then the buyer is asking to stack the commission on top of the purchase price. And let's say it was a $20,000 commission. Now the buyer is paying an extra $20,000 for that house over the next 30 years.
But that seller did not use real estate agents.
Or the seller
Correct.
only was offering to pay their real estate agent.
Okay.
So the seller is saving money. The buyer is spending more money. The home price is higher.
Yeah.
But now some sellers are offering it, some are not. But what we're seeing is that the data is now showing these houses are selling for more.
But I would argue that if they're not paying a buyer's agent commission, but they're paying their agent commission and they're stacking it, it's potato,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know.
It's interesting.
I think what has more of an impact on the market is the lack of inventory and the need for housing. I don't think any of this is going to dominate the numbers. I think it's going to be more business as usual, kind of like you've seen it.
Yeah.
I don't think anything's changed other than a conversation up front and
that's so important.
Interpreting
that's
the
so
rules.
important. Some people are really tooting the horn like this is going to change the game.
No.
Real estate's changed forever.
Nope. Transparency.
I don't think it's going to change as much as people think.
Yeah.
There again, we've had Redfin as an example of a company that's been around for I think close to 20 years.
Yeah.
If I'm correct. And they have a different model than what they've literally on their website are like constantly pushing like we save money, we do it for different, we do it differently or better or for less, all those things, right? But there's still a wide range of different types of agents, different compensation structures. Yep. And so that's already been in the market. So I don't know how much, like you said, things change, but we'll see. And
we'll be back. Yeah, we'll talk
both
more
of
about
us
this.
are about embracing change, right? So this is what we're sharing right now. Yeah, again, we might be wrong, but I think we're going to be more right.
Well, the
than
reason
wrong.
why we have this podcast is to bring you information that will help you, whether you are relocating to Seattle, you're in Seattle, you're wanting to buy in Seattle.
Yeah.
And this has potentially news that could impact your decision here in Seattle. So as you and I both in our industries continue to learn more and experience more, I think that's what makes this podcast valuable is that I'm in the trenches.
Where I'm in the trenches
producing
too.
Mortgages every day. You're selling
How many years have you been a loan officer
16.
now? 16. And I've been in real estate coming up on 10 years.
Yeah.
And my mom was a real estate agent before me.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of
some
experience and wisdom on this podcast.
Yeah. So we'll keep bringing it to you guys.
Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys, and goodbye, Seattle.